Hey there, and welcome back to Richmond Woodworks. So, on today's weekend project, probably next 2, maybe 3 weekends, we'll see how we go. I'm actually going to start building our dining table. So the lounge room is done, so you can have a look up. I think I got the right corner this time, up in the corner in a little card. If you want to have a look at that, some of our lounge room renovations. And next step is to build a dining table. So it's not going to be one of those big, ginormous, grand tables, although it would be really cool to do that. We just don't have the space. So we'll have a little pokey kitchen is what it is. But what we're going to be doing is something a little bit different. So we bought a few stools a little while ago, and the idea is that it's going to be a bit of a raised dining table. So you can also double it as a food prep area. So it's at a nice, comfortable height where you can stand and prepare food. So I went to my most favorite timber supplier, and that's here in Melbourne, called Urban Salvage. They typically recycle timber, so from old houses, bridges, and all this kind of stuff. There's always a bit of an interesting story to some of the timber they have. Sometimes it'll be an old bridge, or sometimes it'll be an old house. I don't know the origin of this one because I just didn't ask, but this is white ash. Now, the aim is to use this 140 by, say, 25 millimeter timber to make the tabletop, and that's step 1. And this thing's 140 millimeters wide, so I think that's about 6 inches or so by about an inch and a bit in thickness. So it's not super thick, and the aim is to not go super thick because the legs are quite thin. But first step we need to do is work out the orientation, and that's going to be a combination of the color, the grain, and things like this, where you can see it's got a little knot in there. You could dig that out, clean that up, and put epoxy in there, which will look quite cool, but I'm not looking for an epoxy type of top, so we'll just use the underside, which is actually quite nice and light. And the reason why we're going for lighter colored timber is because it's a small space, and brighter colors tend to make it look a little bit more open and more spacious. Like the white walls here in the workshop, the light reflects off them quite nicely, although I do have very dark cabinets, as I can see. Anywho, let's go through the orientation of the boards, and this is the fun part where you start mixing and matching and then all these other things, and I'll run you through my thinking. So let's get to it. What we want to do first is just determine what the grain looks like. So as you can see here, it's going in a bit of an arc shape or a bit of a rainbow, so kind of marking it out as it's going along. And what we want to determine is where the center of the tree is. It's probably down here, maybe a little bit further down or something like that. So essentially in a massive circle all the way around that center of the tree. What we want to determine is which way the timber is actually going to move during those seasonal changes. And as you can see, we have a flat sawn bit of timber here, and it's quite normal to think that everything's going to be pulling essentially into the center of the tree. In actual fact, it pulls away from that core. So what we want to do, because we have 2 boards that are essentially flat sawn, is we want to determine which way it's going to move. And if we have it glued right in the center there with a bit of a manual fixture, like a domino or maybe even a biscuit, it's actually going to exacerbate that cup across both boards overall. So that grain kind of moving on either direction, it's essentially the same, and it's going to be pulling away from that center point. So it's actually going to be cupping all the way up like a bit of a U shape. And what we want to do is actually orient the timber in different directions, so it kind of makes a bit of a wobble or a bit of a S shape throughout the entire board. And in this one, what I have is multiple boards strung together, and I'm going to have a few legs and a stringer, and I aim to probably fix it in the center of the stringers and then have Z clips on either side, so it kind of holds it down, but it allows for that seasonal movement. And honestly, this is probably the most fun part of it all, where you essentially try to play around with the timber. So you want to make sure that it's all kind of consistent on top. You want to ensure that you have that wave going through. Ideally, this will be all quarter sawn, but unfortunately, all we had was flat sawn at Urban Salvage. But you want to try to maintain essentially the color of that top, and any kind of defects in the timber as well you want to get rid of. So down there is essentially just like a little knot. So what I might do is actually find a bit of timber to fit in between these two, move this one away, and maybe orient it a different way, essentially to not exacerbate any of the cupping or movement. And I'll put something in the center there just to kind of maintain that bit of a flow. But honestly, this is the best part of it. And what we're going to do now is just cut to essentially me trying to play around with the timber for a little while and see how we get. I think we have a winner. So the idea is it'll be a little bit lighter. And it's amazing, as you're probably watching the video, the underside versus the, like maybe not that one, but potentially this one, it's totally dark, a totally different color, just because of how the grain goes through the board. So you can have, just with one board or a couple of boards, the difference between a very light top versus something like here, which is a very dark top. It's amazing just watching that kind of unfold. It's a bit tedious as well to go through, and you don't want to be spending an excessive amount of money on variations of boards as well, just to kind of mix and match. And largely when you go into some of the timber yards, you're just limited to what they have and what you have access to, I suppose. So I remember going there, deliberately looking for something that's super light like this. I think I went through most of the rack, and this is the lightest timber that I could find for this stuff. I suppose it just depends on the tree, depends on where they got it, how they cut the tree and where the tree was. I suppose it's just fascinating work for the timber. Anywho, I think this is it. Now the frustration is, although this is dressed all around, it's meant to be pretty square, there's still a few gaps here. So what might happen is I might have to joint the edges of them just to have them super flat. Certain instances, like here, it's a little bit tighter fit. And it's also the board orientations, is how they went as well. I think just because this timber's been sitting in the shed for a couple of months, it's naturally just moved and acclimatized to things in here. And it's also just moved some of the joins around as well. So what I could do, this is the exact width for the table that I want. So I don't really have a lot to play with. So I probably can only maybe lose 1 or 2 millimeters off each board, and that compounds to 2, 4, 6, 8. So it's almost a centimeter or half an inch that's lost in the width, which I don't want to do too much, because then that affects everything else. It affects the frame and all that kind of thing as well. Ideally, I should have bought one more board to have here, and then I could have jointed this as much as I wanted to, and then cut the board to my final dimensions. But timber's not cheap these days. So anyway, I think I'm gonna stick with this. I'm gonna put a big carpenter's triangle here, and leave it at that. Joint some of these edges where I can. Hopefully I don't stuff it up and lose too much material. That also means I need to set up the jointer as well. So let's get to doing that, I suppose. Rightio, so those edges of the board are all done and are ready for putting together. Now I thought about how I'm going to do it, whether I use biscuits or some fancy joinery or even dowels, but I went out and did something silly. And you know that age-old saying that I keep using as an excuse to buy new tools, that a new project is a great excuse to buy a new tool. Went out and bought myself one of these bad boys. I've been eyeing off maybe getting one of these for the last 2, maybe 3 years, and I finally bit the bullet and done it. Now, I've never used one before. I've used a biscuit joiner, probably similar kind of principles, and I won't show you me trying to faff around and getting it working. I won't even bother doing a tool review because there's just so many out there on the DF500, and it's so new that even the cable has its ties on it still, so I haven't used it yet. So I'll plan to play around with it and get my head around how to use it off camera. I'm assuming it's very similar to the biscuit joiner, but I'll soon find out, I suppose. Anyway, so the edges are all done. I did a dry fit and clamped everything up, and the edges are coming in perfectly, so there's no need for any fill between those gaps, which is fantastic. Plan to use a domino to kind of align those boards nicely together. And then also plan to use a domino, which would be very interesting, and that's the main reason why I bought it, is to assemble the legs and the aprons of the actual table itself that's going to hold up the tabletop. The difference is I'm going to be painting it as well, so it's going to be nicely sanded and gap filled and all that stuff, and painting it. So there's no real necessity to do any kind of dovetail or any fancy joinery for it, because it's going to be painted white. Not my choice. I just do what I'm told. Anyway, let's get to me playing around with this thing. I'll do that off camera, and then the next thing you'll see through the magic of video is me joining those ends together. So let's get to it. So I've done a little bit of practicing with the domino. I'm definitely not an expert, and also found that the dominoes that I bought when I bought the tool were the wrong size for the bit. So naturally I had to go out and buy a new bit, and holy moly, are they expensive. It was $100 just for a 6mm bit. So that's probably the most expensive drill bit I've ever bought in my life. Anyway, no time like the present. I think what we should be doing is dominoing the tabletop. Also, what I've done off camera, I've marked a little X just so I know which one I'm going to be doing tight and which ones are going to be sloppy or loose. I don't know what the correct terminology is for domino weld, but call it loose. Now, everyone's favorite time, gluing. So I have Type Bond 1, which has a short clamp time, Type Bond 2, which has a fast set time. Don't really know what the difference is. Add a comment below if you like. And Type Bond 3, which is a waterproof and a longer assembly time. And that's what I'm gonna go for, because I don't wanna be rushed off my feet and I don't wanna get stressed. It's the weekend, it's no time for stress. Anyway, what I tend to do with clamping is that I have everything ready and laid out to go. And what I always make sure is that I have a damp rag or something at the ready so I can clean everything up as we go along. And if you tend to do like a dry clamp, have everything ready to go, undo it, put the glue on, put it back in, and then clamp it up properly, you know it's all good to go. So let's get to that. Now, if you're wondering what this stuff is, essentially it's aluminium, or extruded aluminum, or aluminium, or 80-20 if you want to Google it. And you can buy it in various profiles. This has a flat side and two non, like basically extrusion. So essentially you put little T-nuts in there and you clamp things down, you can stick them together. I made my most of my camper van out of this stuff because it's super strong and super lightweight, so you use less timber. And also you can fix things here and there, which is pretty cool. If you don't have access to this stuff, if you want to buy the stuff, there's a place called RM Aluminium. I'll link that in the description below. No sponsorship or affiliation or anything like that. The guy just runs it out of like a little warehouse, and a super nice guy. He's pretty much open, I think it's like 16 hours a day. I think he lives around the corner. Just call him up and he's there in like 2 minutes. It's crazy. Anyway, so if you don't have something like that, you can just use a bit of hardwood like this, or a longer bit of hardwood, and put some cell tape or some sticky tape on the end of it, just so the glue doesn't stick to the timber itself. You want hardwood just because it's not going to flex as much as your pine or your softer woods as well, because you want to use that clamping pressure to align the boards up. It's pretty much what the domino does anyway, but I'm gonna just go full crazy on this thing and glue it properly and clamp it and all those things that you see, all the clamps and everything like that already. So let's get to gluing. Alrighty, it's the next day and I've let the glue dry overnight. I have my coffee. I've been out already this morning to go get some new toys, which I'll show you all maybe a little bit later in a future episode. Right, so let's pull all the clamps apart and have a look at what we're dealing with. No doubt underneath there's going to be a ton of glue, so let's get to it. Cool, so there's a ton of squeeze out here, so I just have a really old chisel I tend to just leave to the side just to take all that stuff off. So I'll do that, I'll clean that up, and then what we need to do is everyone's favorite job, sanding. So we get all this nice and flat and level. On the underside, some of the boards didn't align 100%, but on the actual face side they do. So those boards were not 100% identical in dimensions. That's always something for everyone to consider. Cool. Let's get scraping and sanding and all those good things. So before I start sanding everything down, there's no point wasting sandpaper on material I'm not going to be using. I'm going to cut it all down to its final dimensions, and also where there's a little bit of a chip out here, I'm going to cut that as well. We'll do a very, very slight round over, but I want a bit more of a square look. The round over will match the profile very slightly of the legs, which I'll show you in a future episode. Right, so let's cut everything up. Let's cut it to its final dimensions, including around this knot here. So the aim is to have the table go right up to the knot, just up there, so I don't have to fill anything, and it's perfectly sized for that. Anyway, so that's winning. Anywho, let's cut everything up and get back to it. And that is it. Tabletop is done. Now, all I need to do is just sand, and that's definitely not a spectator sport, so I'll save you all the bother. And I'm going to be applying this hard wax oil. So it recommends you do something like a 120 or 150 grit sand, and that's probably what I'm going to go down to. I did have a look at maybe using Danish oil, some carbothane, and wipe-on poly, and this one ended up looking the best for me. And I ran it past the lady in charge, and she definitely recommended this one as well. So winning. Anyway, so the next episode, what I'm going to be doing is actually making the table on which this actually is all supported. So stick around for that episode coming up in a few weeks. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, and do all those good things. And please do leave a comment. I really enjoy interacting with each and every single one of you. And I hope you all take very good care of yourselves and have a lovely time in your workshop this weekend. Bye for now.